Thanks, everyone. It is great to be here in the coveted post-lunch nap time slot. So you're probably wondering why an art director is talking to a room full of history teachers. It's a good question, and there's a good story behind it. And it's a story about how you can learn a lot about history even when you're trying to do something else entirely. And the story starts with this. When you're issued a United States patent, this is the cover it comes wrapped in. When I started here 4 years ago, I created a visual brand identity system that completely redesigned most of our printed materials. But for a variety of reasons, we left this alone. That doesn't mean that it didn't need to be redesigned, because boy did it need to be redesigned. And every time I saw one, I was reminded of that. Then about a year ago, I realized that sometime in the summer of 2018, we would be issuing patent number 10 million. If there was ever going to be a good excuse for a redesign, that was it. Now, government has a reputation for being slow and bureaucratic, so let me tell you about the approval process for this project. I told a guy, he told a guy, and I was approved and ready to go. I put together a team and we got to work. It was clear from the beginning that we couldn't design this in a vacuum. The process had to be informed by the whole history of patent covers, dating all the way back to the first one signed by George Washington in 1790. It also became clear that we didn't know much about that history. There are no books on the subject, no websites, no agency historian who's been compiling this information. So I figured our best bet was to go straight to the primary sources, the documents themselves. Seeing as we're a federal agency, our first call was to the National Archives. They've got a copy of every patent ever issued, except for what was lost when the Patent Office burned down in 1836, and when the Patent Office burned down again in 1877. However, those are our copies, not the ones sent to Inventors, which means they didn't have covers. So, dead end there. But I still needed at least a few examples to give my design team some context. Where could I turn those up? Even there, I didn't find much. But it did give me a couple of images that we could spread out on a table to at least give us a sense of how things used to be done. And of course, we still had examples of the patent cover that we were currently using. But my curiosity was piqued, and I was also a little annoyed that we didn't know more about this stuff. That meant I was highly motivated to learn more. So where to turn next? Well, we are the Patent Office, so what about here? The next place I looked was literally our own walls. There are a number of replicas of that 1790 patent hanging up around campus. So we had at least the bookends, the first patent and the latest one. We started to do some more exploring, and we found a few things. The lobby for the Patent Trial and Appeal Board hearing rooms has a great collection of framed patents from the mid to late 19th century. Our public search facility right upstairs had a Thomas Jefferson signed patent sitting in a display case. Sometimes people even just send us these things, which is how we came into possession of a patent signed by President John Quincy Adams, as well as another one from 1856. So now we were beginning to collect a critical mass of information. I took what we had and used it to create a timeline which started to give us an idea of how the design of the patent cover had evolved over time. There were still a lot of gaps to fill in. The next resource I tapped was our 13,000 employees. I knew that Elizabeth Dougherty personally owned a wonderful example from 1867. We put out a call in our internal newsletter asking if anybody had a bit of patent history hanging on their walls, and they did. Sadly, they were mostly the same 20th century design, but it was cool to hear how many employees had family patents hanging over their desks. Then we heard from Bob Cohen, a trademark examining attorney, whose hobby was collecting vintage patents and trademarks. I went to see him, and it was immediately clear that we had hit the jackpot. The head of our Office of Data Management brought me one she had hanging on her wall, which turned out to be a one-of-a-kind, hand-inscribed bicentennial patent signed by Gerald Ford and presented during a ceremony at Independence Hall. She found it just lying around the office about 10 years ago. Then, when I wasn't even looking, we discovered a trove of new information. We have an ongoing partnership with the National Inventors Hall of Fame. Among other things, they operate the museum that we have upstairs. And if you haven't been there yet, I encourage you to stop by while you're here. We were in Ohio for meetings with them, and during a tour, we stopped by their archives. I asked offhandedly if they had any patent cover examples. The archivist turned and pointed me to a cabinet with about 40 file drawers. This was a whole new kind of jackpot. Their collection came from the files of an Akron area retired patent attorney, and it ranged from the late 19th to the mid-20th century. Because it was a large trove of documents from a concentrated period in history, we were able to learn some new kinds of information. One of the problems I had, and still have, is being able to identify the points in time when we changed from one design to another. We can tell when a specific example was used, since they're mostly dated, but we couldn't get a good idea of how long each of them was in use. But we could flip through this collection in chronological order. It started around 1898 with one of these. We were able to figure out that shortly afterwards, around 1903, we changed over to this design. We even gained some insight into the office's own workflow, as we were able to identify the point in time, March of 1909, when we started filling in the blanks with typewriters instead of by hand. So that gave us some insight into the more recent end of the timeline. We learned more about the earlier days when I found a rare documents dealer who not only did a fair amount of business in vintage patents, but also had fantastic high-quality images of all of them. Until then, we couldn't really get good images of patent covers that we didn't photograph ourselves, so this was a great find. His collection also included this design from 1838, which we hadn't seen anywhere else. This was one of only a couple of engravings ever used that focused on representations of American innovation. Mostly they were just pictures of our building. The dealer was also kind enough to offer to lend us some artifacts from his collections, so hopefully you'll be able to see some of them up close in our museum later this year. So we're making progress, learning more of this history and filling in more of the blanks. There was still one piece of information I needed. When did we start using the current patent cover? Based on patent cover examples we'd seen, I knew that the early 20th century cover was used at least within my own lifetime. The current cover doesn't include an issue date, but based on director's signatures, we could tell that it was used as recently or as early as the 1980s. We had to figure out how to narrow down that window. Undoubtedly, there are agency records, but they'd be buried in hundreds of linear feet of correspondence boxes at the National Archives. And that's where the difference between me and an actual historian becomes clear, because I was not going down that rabbit hole. So what was I left with? In this case, I just started doing targeted image searches, 1980 patent, 1981 patent, etc. And it actually worked. I was able to find an example of the old design issued in 1983 and an example of the new one issued around 1985 or 1986. So now we had one of our key talking points. The current cover had been in use for more than 30 years. Combine that with what we learned earlier, and we now knew that our new design was only the second time this had been done in a century, and that was a sobering thought. We now had a pretty complete timeline of the 228-year history of this document. All that was left to do was to plug in the last missing piece, our new design. We discovered a few interesting things, like the fact that the script font we selected was a very close match for the calligraphy from that 1838 example you saw before. So at the end of this process, looking back over the whole timeline, it was clear that, intentionally or not, the patent cover served a variety of purposes: practical, legal, ornamental, symbolic. The best of them were powerful visual representations of the significance of an inventor's achievement. Our goal in designing the new patent cover was to create something that would live up to that legacy. Whether or not we did, well, that's for history to judge.